Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and today's podcast is going to be a really good show. And I encourage you guys, if you haven't, to check out the previous ones we've done on this podcast. But today's going to be really interesting. Tonight's an NBA All-Star game, which for a lot of fans will be very exciting to watch and see, and how all this condensed schedule unfolds. I've talked about it at length, how they're going to construct that. But today's show is going to be awesome. We're going to talk about the Colin Gillespie injury and that impact it has for Villanova going forward. We're going to talk about Andre Drummond, Hassan Whiteside, and their rumors with the Lakers, and also guys like PJ Tucker, guys like that. But also tune in later into my show as I break down my top 5 MVP candidates. My list is very different, I think, than other people's, depending on how I have them ranked. I think my 5 is consensus with the other people who have been ranking them, but I have a little bit of a different kind of list in terms of how I rank 3 through 5 specifically. But let's talk about who I think right now is the MVP and who's playing at the highest level this year, and that is Joel Embiid from the Philadelphia 76ers. He's been playing unreal this year. And my favorite to win the MVP so far this season, because of the way he's been dominating players and the way that he's been exerting his influence in the low post. This has been a criticism of him in the past, because when he was coached by Brett Brown, people thought that Brett Brown was not motivating him enough to go down the low post and mid post and dominate bigs that way, because he's so skilled. But let's just break down a little bit of what he's doing this year and his journey to kind of get people understanding of how this is not really a surprise, even though it may seem as a surprise to a lot of people. Well, first of all, he's averaging 30 points and 11.6 rebounds, right? And that's the highest point total of his career. He's shooting also the best percentages of his career at 41.6% from 3 and 52% from the floor. He's also shooting 86% from the line. But those are just basic stats, right? But those are incredible stats. But that doesn't really paint the entire picture, I think, when you talk about Joel Embiid. The fact is, they have the best record in the Eastern Conference, which is a surprise because last year they were 6th in the Eastern Conference and got beat out in 4 games by Boston in the bubble last year. So if you look at all of that, you're going to say, how is this dude taking this team to the next level? Well, some people want to credit that to Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey, because Doc Rivers is a guy who knows how to motivate players, which I think that's partially the reason he's motivated guys for sure. And Daryl Morey is a great GM. He built a championship-level team year after year in Houston. Now, they didn't quite live up to his expectations, but he definitely built the roster to get that team to a championship level, and they almost did in 2018, losing 7 games to that Dynasty Warriors team, if you guys don't remember that. But also, let's look at the fact that Joel has been an all-star starter. He's an all-star starter again this year, but he was one last year. So people understand that this guy's ultra-talented. But I think the fact is that he's only missed 6 games, and this is a guy who's been injury-prone throughout his career. And he's giving bigs the work. Again, he gave Gobert 40 points and 19 rebounds the other night. When they beat the Jazz in overtime, when he hit that huge step-back 3 to tie the game, you could tell he just dominated Gobert. And Gobert is considered the best defensive big in the league. Joel's up there as well, but Gobert's won multiple Defensive Players of the Year's award. And that shows you the mindset Joel has this year. But I think it's important to get into why I think he's not a surprise at this MVP candidate. And let's just start out basically kind of where he grew to get to this point, right? He's from Cameroon. He grew up as a guy who wanted to be a professional volleyball player, right? He had the athleticism, the footwork, and the height to be able to be good at that. But he saw his idol, Hakeem Olajuwon, play. And he became his idol from watching Hakeem play, watching his footwork, watching the way he conducted himself on the court. And that motivated Joel to start playing basketball when he was 15 years old. Now put that in context. He only started playing basketball when he was 15 years old. A lot of people who are on a high level started playing basketball when they were 5, 6 years old. So a lot of people had a 10-year advantage on Joel when he came over to the States when he was 16 to pursue that professional dream. And people sit there and they say, okay, well, he came to the States. Of course he dominated. He's big and strong. That's not true. That's not at all what happened. He went to Montverde Academy, which, if people don't know Montverde Academy, they produce NBA prospects, lottery picks every year. If you know who Cade Cunningham is from Oklahoma State, he went there. Ben Simmons, D'Angelo Russell. You can go down the list. Those are some certain games and certain names that I've seen who've done an incredible job there. But let's also talk about the fact that Joel struggled when he got here. He didn't get much playing time at Montverde because his court awareness, understanding where to be, his footwork, coming off screens and stuff like that, he struggled with. He just didn't have the right timing and that kind of stuff. But he had a lot of natural ability. He just was very raw in terms of his skill set. And the thing is, what's interesting about that to me is that he worked really hard. He didn't let that stop him from continuing his dream. And he transferred to the Rock School, which is a Christian school based out of Gainesville, Florida, which is the home of the Florida Gators. And he struggled there too. He was on the JV team, and there's a viral video that happened a couple years ago that showed him showed his raw talent, but also showed the fact that he really struggled with court awareness. He had a play where he got on the fast break and didn't know where he was and threw it out of bounds to the other team. But Joel persevered, and then he averaged 13 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks his senior year. They won the state championship, and he ended up going to Kansas and getting recruited. And this was a dream for him, right? It'd be a dream for anyone to get to that level. If you're looking at this, and that showed kind of his level of determination and motivation. If you get him correctly motivated, he was able to really push through those trials and tribulations from a year ago, right, to get to this point as an MVP. But that also happened in high school too. He passed through those tough growing periods in his skill to get to a level where he could go to Kansas and actually provide an immediate impact as a freshman. He averaged 11 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks as a freshman at Kansas. But the problem with his season at Kansas is people saw that he had a lot of great footwork in the post. He had an incredible ability. You threw it down to him, he could score in a really high percentage. But also, his problem was that he got a stress fracture that derailed his opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament. And if you guys don't remember that Kansas team, they lost in the round of 32 to Stanford, whose best player was Dwight Powell, who plays for the Dallas Mavericks now. So it's kind of funny seeing how the things have transpired and continued as they got to the NBA. And that's kind of what Joel's career has been like. It's been riddled by injuries, right? The first 2 years, he had a surgery on his navicular bone in his foot. No one thought he was going to come back the same. He was out 2 years. Third year came back. He was on minutes restrictions, only averaged 20 and 8. But again, he showed a lot of promise on the defensive end, which is something that he's been able to do consistently throughout his career. Block shots, be a rim protector, disrupt opposing teams' offensive sets and the big guy's success. But I also think the fact that if you go through all his numbers, right, he continually improved. His second year playing, he averaged almost 23 points a game. Then the next year he averages 27. But the problem came personally was the fact that he had a really disappointing 2019 to 2020 campaign. Right, he was really down numbers. His rebounding has always been very consistent, but he was really down in points and field goal percentage. He only averaged 23 points. He was floating a lot out to the perimeter. the team was losing games. They became the 6th seed in the East. And even the playoff series against Boston, where he had good numbers, there was a sense of him being out of shape, lazy, having no killer instinct. And this is not me saying, this is what people were saying. And everyone was questioning him, if he had the toughness to win a championship, if he had the toughness to lead a team, because everyone knew he was ultra talented. But people looked at guys like Nicola Yokish, Rudy Gobert, and said, these guys can actually help you win a championship team because they have more of that it factor, right? Nikola Jokic led the Denver Nuggets in the bubble to the Western Conference Finals. Now they lost in 5 games to the Lakers, but everyone lost to the Lakers that year. The Lakers won the championship. And he was instrumental about why they beat the Clippers, right? He had that it factor. And a lot of people didn't see that from Joel Embiid. But what Joel Embiid did this summer, now this could have been Doc, but also from what I heard, it was a lot of inner motivation too, is he got himself into the best shape of his career. And also, I heard a story that he actually got regarded as worse than Rudy Gobert and Nikola Jokic and Anthony Davis. And he quoted saying, basically, I understand Anthony Davis had a better season than me. And he said, Nikola Jokic, debatable. But he's like, Rudy Gobert, are you kidding me? And if you saw the other night against the Jazz, he torched Rudy Gobert. And Rudy Gobert is a very good player, an all-star player, great defensive force, helping Utah have the best record in the NBA. I'm a big Rudy Gobert fan. I think he's a guy you need on your team because he rebounds at a high level. He's great diving to the basket and pick and rolls, which opens up opportunities for shooters. And he's a guy that's always going to give you 13 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 blocks all the time. That's kind of what he is. But Joel took that personally. And a lot of times when players take things personally, they come back better than ever. You look at Jordan's Last Dance documentary. When he took things personally, right, which was a lot of times, he ended up becoming better. And I think that's what Joel has done, right? He's taken all the adversity that he's faced throughout his life, all the criticism, and prevailed from it. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it, right? He's been riddled by injuries, back injuries, foot injuries, sickness in the playoffs, right? People just question his durability. Some people are even saying, trade him and keep Ben Simmons because Ben Simmons is dependable. Ben Simmons is not as much of an attitude issue. But if you think about it, that made no sense when it comes to this season. Now, Ben Simmons has been unbelievable defensively, and he's been playing well offensively the last couple months. He's an all-star as well, rightfully deserving so. But are people really saying now that you would take Ben Simmons over Joel Embiid based on this season? I would say no. Joel's first. He was first for a long time in player efficiency rating. Now he's second. But still, I've explained this multiple times when I've been on and explaining NBA stuff to you guys, is that player efficiency rating seems like a dumb stat. And a lot of people look at analytics and don't like the fact that analytics have taken over the NBA. But PER is really important for understanding a guy's offensive impact on the game. And for Joel, that makes a lot of sense because he's impacting the game offensively in much more ways than he has previously. He has a career high in assists this year. He actually has a positive assist-to-turnover ratio. That's the first time in his career he's done that. And people sit there and say, well, this must be Doc Rivers. You know, Joel is never going to be like this. And Doc Rivers has a history of motivating guys, but also Doc Rivers had trouble building chemistry with Los Angeles Clippers last year. This year, the Sixers have no issue, it seems, in chemistry. And Joel kind of makes that chemistry. They throw it into him. They trust his decision-making. And again, he's leading the NBA in free throw attempts, and he shoots 86%. It's a big guy shooting 86% is phenomenal because you go to the line as much as he does, you know he's not going to miss those free throws. As opposed to guys like Rudy Gobert, Giannis Antetokounmpo. You send them to the line 15 times a game, they're not going to make 80% of their free throws. Both guys are 50% free throw shooters, which is why Joel's been very valuable this year, is because you can trust him in late game situations. He's made clutch shot after clutch shot. Let's look at Chicago. Let's look at games he's played against Toronto, the Lakers, and most recently against Utah, where he hit, I think, his MVP iconic shot. And before that game, I probably would still have given it to LeBron James for MVP. And I still think LeBron's got a great opportunity to win MVP this year. Because it would be really cool to see him win it because of the fact of he being 36 and people calling him old and the team still doing well. But Joel has this team is the best record in the Eastern Conference. And he's not just doing it on the offensive end either. He's 5th in win shares in the NBA, which tells me he has a great defensive impact as well. It means he's top 5 in defensive win shares. LeBron's number 1, but Joel's top 5. And Joel is top 5 in almost every offensive category. He's also averaging 1.4 blocks, 1.2 steals. The most steals he's averaged in his career. And that's because they ask him to do a lot. And you see that he creates an impact on that team. And it's a positive one because he's not complaining as much. He's in shape. He's actually buying in. And he's using the motivation that he's had throughout his life to overcome tough situations. When he gets heavily criticized or doubters are on him or he's in a tough period in his life, as you can see from how he's gone throughout history, he always rises up and gets better from it. Right? Being from Cameroon, moving to America where he didn't understand English that well, to struggling with basketball at Montfort Academy and initially at the Rock School. Then to lead them to a championship and then go to Kansas, have a good season at Kansas, but then deal with injuries. Then he goes to the NBA, deals with injuries. Then he has success. Right? Then people question his motivation. Now he's having more success. Whenever you see a good athlete story, you have to think of the fact that Joel Embiid, I think, is a good basketball story. He's a guy that has been criticized because of his talent and lack of aggression, assertiveness, motivation at times. But he's also a guy that's won games for this team this year because of the fact that he's motivated, aggressive, dominant. And he's not just doing it by the skill set of like a Shaquille O'Neal just turning around and dunking on guys. He's beating them with skill, 3-point shooting, taking bigs off the dribble, really skilled mid-post footwork, really skilled low-post footwork. If you want to look at a guy as a big and see how his footwork it can be, Hakeem Olajuwon probably number 1, right? Kareem. But the modern age, Joel Embiid is the perfect example of what a good footwork center could be. He's big, he's mobile, he's athletic, he's got great hands, great footwork. And he's dominating bigs. And also the thing is, if you let him face up and shoot that mid-range jump shot, his touch is so feathery that it goes in more times than not. It's basically automatic. And then also the fact, again, like I said, he's shooting a little under 42% from 3. Shows you exactly the development he's made in his game. He's taking a lot less threes than he has in the past and being more efficient. Because Doc Rivers has motivated him, but he's also motivated himself because he's been through a lot in his life to get him to that point. Now, what does this ultimately mean for the Philadelphia 76ers? Are they going to win the East? Are they going to be NBA Finals champions? Well, I think they're definitely going to make the Eastern Conference Finals. I definitely think that. 100% they're going to make it. Because Joel Embiid is playing at a different level than he has in past years. Ben Simmons is playing great defensively, and I think he understands what he can be. But Tobias Harris is also playing at a high level. Because Doc Rivers has gotten the best out of Tobias Harris in his career so far. And if you think about that, that's why I think Philly is a Eastern Conference Final lock. And I think they actually could beat Brooklyn. If Brooklyn doesn't get any good big guys in the trade deadline, if they don't get Andre Drummond, they get like Blake Griffin, for example. And I like Blake Griffin. He's a superstar when healthy, but he's not healthy anymore. He's not the same player. And supposedly I hear he's looking to go to Brooklyn. But they have no one to match up with Ben Simmons or Joel in the post. Joel's going to average 30 against these guys easily. And then they do have the shooting around Joel to make things interesting. So I think they're definitely an Eastern Conference final lock, and I think they definitely could beat Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn's a slightly better team at the moment, but Philly's not far off. And I know I've been down on Philly in my life too because of Joel's effort. Not anymore. I'm definitely a believer in this team because of the fact of what Joel can bring to the table. And the fact that he's used all this motivation and criticism to get himself to being a better player. Right? That's what criticism's there to do, is to get you to be a better player. And if you watch the way they play through him a lot, and he's playing super intelligently, reading double teams so much better than he has in the past, getting better position, making quicker moves, dominating guys where he should dominate them. And then again, he's stretching the court when they lay off of him. But he's not shooting 9 threes a game. He's shooting 4, which is a lot better. And that's why they're winning games. We're going to take a quick commercial break here. But when I come back, we're going to talk about the Colin Gillespie injury and what the impact on Villanova's titles chances that's going to have. And later on in the segment, I'm going to break down my top 5 MVP candidates. So stay tuned for that as well. See you guys shortly.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. On my last segment, I talked about why it's not really a surprise that Joel Embiid is the MVP frontrunner this year after all the adversity he's gone through to get to this point. So, when you think about Joel Embiid, it's actually not really as much of a surprise as people think. And when I researched it, it actually really confirmed a little bit more about how great basketball stories of motivation really are. On this next segment, though, I'm going to break down Villanova point guard Colin Gillespie tearing his MCL in a win over Creighton and the impact that had against Providence yesterday for Villanova, and what I think that impact is going to have going forward for Villanova. Also check out later in my show as I break down my top 5 MVP candidates. That'll be awesome. But getting back to the Gillespie injury, I think it's pretty terrible what happened to him, obviously, and an MCL injury is no joke. That's a very serious injury, and for a guy who's been durable, reliable, a great leader, a great player at Villanova, that's really tough. And I feel for him and his family, feel for that team. That's just a tough situation. And how the injury happened was he got tangled up with Creighton's Damian Jefferson when Jefferson was trying to score on him in the post. And Villanova ended up winning that game 72-60 after Creighton came back and made a nice little run. And Jay Wright described it as, he stated, "We are all devastated for Colin," and he said that Colin is the heart and soul of our program, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you have a guy who's been there for the 2018 National Championship team as a key bench guy to a guy who's gotten better each year and become a really good leader for this team, it's obviously very devastating. It's very devastating. And what's also more devastating for him is just the fact that he was a top 5 candidate for the Bob Cousy Award, which honors the nation's best point guards. And it's because he has the best assist-to-turnover ratio in the Big East Conference. It's because of the fact that he hits game-timely shots, and he's a gamer. Big games, he shows up to play. He hits big shots to quell certain runs by certain teams. He's also a very assertive leader, a guy who's done a really good job of helping the younger guys develop, like a Jeremiah Robinson Earl, like a Justin Moore, like a Cole Swider, who now's a junior, Eric Dixon, freshman, all these kind of guys. Now, Brian Antoine, who just came back from an injury recently. And his statistics actually are pretty good. But again, people would say, oh, how is this guy a Bob Cousy Award member with these stats? Because he's only averaging 14 points, 5 assists, and 3.3 rebounds. But he has an assist rate of 25.7%, and that's the best on his team. And like I said, he has a 3.0 assist-to-turnover ratio, which means he takes care of the basketball, which is what Jay Wright values in his system at Villanova. A lot of ball movement, smart plays, good footwork, pump faking, coming on jump stops, kicking out, three-point shooting. And that's what Villanova does value, is the fact of being able to be somewhat dependable is important for them. And they're going to be the number 1 seed in the Big East tournament. They clinched that with a win over Creighton this past Wednesday, but they aren't going to be the same team heading in. They just lost Justin Moore yesterday to a sprained ankle, so hopefully he'll be back for that Big East game. But yesterday was not a very good game for them. They lost 54-52 to Providence after making an incredible comeback in the second half. They were down 38-21 at half and came back and lost 54-52. So their defense was phenomenal yesterday, but their offense was obviously very out of sync without Colin Gillespie there. And Justin Moore for much of the game. Now, they're projected as a 3 seed, possibly could be a 4 seed, depending on how they do in the Big East tournament. But I'm going to break down kind of how the Providence game definitely opened up some holes that I think Gillespie filled when he was there. And I think the fact is, having Justin Moore not be able to play much of the game too, you have to also take that into account. Because it's not Jay Wright, and people are going to start blaming Jay Wright. And Jay Wright knows what he's doing. He knows how to get the system correctly. He knows how to get guys into position to be successful. That's why he's one of the best coaches in the country. But when you're used to running the offense with Colin Gillespie, a very good ball handler, a very smart player, and then Justin Moore, another guy who's a really good ball handler, a smart player, then you have to rely on a guy who hasn't played a ton of minutes this year in Chris Arcidiacono, Ryan Arcidiacono's brother, who is a great player at Villanova. It's tough because, look, Chris did a good job yesterday. He came in, played 25 minutes, didn't really turn the ball over, got some assists, got some rebounds, ran the offense effectively. But it just isn't the same, obviously. And with Gillespie, too, he's a guy that's going to dive for a loose ball, get a timely rebound, get a steal when you need him to, make a big three. That's kind of what he brings as a guy who's a good, number one, a great player. And number two, a guy who's been through the ranks at Villanova, been through the tough times, and always kind of found a way to make it work. And it's tough when you put younger underclassmen in that situation and ask them to be what he is. Because it's just hard for anyone to be that way. Before this year, I honestly thought Villanova was going to be a very good team. I thought that they're a younger team, they had some experience. So I thought that they were going to definitely hit bumps in the road. But I think what Jay Wright's going to be able to do is he's going to be able to try and make this more by a committee job. Now, if they get Justin Moore back, I think they're in very good shape. But I think the thing with a guy like Justin Moore, what he brings is he brings a guy who's tenacious going to the basket, He can hit the three. Will get into you defensively. And he's a threat, at least at that point guard position, to score. Chris Arcidiacono, I believe, definitely could score, but he hasn't had a ton of run to be able to do that. And Providence was pressuring him all game, and he had to run the offense, which is what college basketball is about. College basketball is about actually playing basketball. That's why Villanova's been so successful for so long. Now, I do think this team's glaring weakness is the fact that they struggle to guard post guys. And that's because Jeremiah Robinson-Earl is a very good player, possibly an NBA draft pick this year. He may stay another year. And Jermaine Samuels had a great game yesterday, and he's been great for 4 years for Villanova. He's been a really steady player they've had. But those guys are both power forward, small forward types. And you're asking them to guard arguably the best big in the league in Nate Watson. That's a tough matchup because if he gets position, it's kind of over. He's big, he's strong, he's pretty athletic. And if he gets deep position, it was kind of over in the first half. Second half, they did a much better job at doubling him, making him make quicker decisions than he would have liked, getting him frustrated. But again, they're going to play teams in the Big East tournament that they played before. So as long as they can get to the semifinals or finals or win the Big East tournament, I think they're in good shape. But I think in the NCAA tournament, they might struggle against teams that have a dominant big guy and also dominant perimeter guards. Like a Gonzaga, like a Michigan, like an Illinois. Right? I see Villanova as a Sweet 16 type of team. And I think and they could possibly make the Elite Eight. It just depends on how the other guys step up. With Gillespie, I thought they had a chance to go to the Elite Eight. I did. Because I think that he would have hit big shots and everything like that. But without him, Jay Wright's going to do a good job, right? It's not going to be Jay Wright. That's going to be the issue. It's just going to be, are the underclassmen that are going to be playing more minutes, like a Chris Arcidiacono, and then some upperclassmen like Brandon Slater and underclassmen like Eric Dixon, are they going to be able to step up and get those big buckets when they need to? Now, I thought those guys actually played really hard and well yesterday. They just missed free throws down the stretch. They missed a lot of threes. I mean, they shot 22.2% from three yesterday, right? And then, you lost Justin Moore, like I said before, who averages almost 13 points a game for you. That could have helped if he had at least had 12 yesterday, right? He could have had 4 and they would have won the game. And also a guy like Chris Arcidiacono, who's going to have to take on more of those point guard duties without Gillespie in the lineup, is a good opportunity for him. It's always a good opportunity for underclassmen who haven't played a ton of minutes when injuries happen to take that next step. It's going to be a lot tougher for them, though, right? Because Gillespie, like I said before, has had big-time impact and big-time moments. And you can just look at games like Georgetown at Georgetown this year. They were down almost 20 at half, and he comes out, plays great defense, makes all these big threes, and they go from losing that game, potentially looking like they're going to lose that game, to easily winning it. And look, they've been through a lot this year, right? Jay Wright, unfortunately, had COVID, and they were out for 2 weeks, and now they have this. But the one thing I'll say about Villanova is they're a team that definitely can overcome adversity based on their track record and their history. Right, in 2018, they had a team that overcame adversity and won the NCAA championship against Michigan. 2016 was kind of a similar situation, right? No one expected them to be there, and they were. And Jay Wright's, again, one of the best coaches in the country. So he's going to be able to make this a more by-committee job, but he's going to demand more from Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, who did not have his best game yesterday, had a chance to win at the buzzer, and his three was just a little short. But again, the big thing with Villanova, right, is they do struggle on the road. They've lost their last 4 road games. And that happens when you have a younger team. And yesterday was understandable because, again, you're adjusting to not having Colin Gillespie in the lineup. And you're also adjusting the fact that, like I said, Justin Moore was not there either, right? And look, guys like Caleb Daniels are going to have to step up more. because he's struggled a lot recently, and I think he's a very talented player. Brandon Slater, I thought he's been a pest and a great defender all year. He's going to have to make timely threes. He's going to have to make his free throws. He was 1 of 5 yesterday from the line, and he had big free throws down the stretch. And that happens for a lot of players, right? When you're putting in thrust into big moments, you're going to have to make those free throws. And he's been playing well. So, I'm not taking away. He played a good game yesterday. It's just the shots didn't fall for them yesterday, and their defense was really good. If they can keep up that defensive effort like they did in the second half, they're in really good shape to make that Sweet 16 Elite 8 run, or maybe farther. We don't know, right? It always comes down to one team gets randomly hot in the NCAA tournament. Teams that are going in playing really well usually do well. And teams that have played difficult schedules and hit their stride at the right time usually do well as well. Like Illinois, right? Illinois is a team that's hitting their stride at the right time. They put a really difficult schedule and arguably the best conference in the Big Ten. And that's why a lot of people think they're going to be a Final Four team for sure. But I think the Colin Gillespie injury is definitely very impactful for Villanova. And everyone's going to sit there and say, oh, Villanova's got no chance now. But I think I'm going to take the more positive route on it and say they still do. It's just going to be a different kind of game. They're going to look for multiple guys to be able to make a difference. And certain guys who've been struggling recently are going to have to step up more. Like Brian Antoine's going to have to step up more, make his threes, and play more minutes and play more impactful minutes. And it's tough. He came off an injury, so it's tough to say, go out there and start being what you were in high school, right? And he was an unbelievable player in high school. Because especially with this system, it's move the ball, right? Jermaine Samuels was the bright spot yesterday. He had 21 and 8, and he played phenomenal yesterday, being able to just rip and go each way and make threes and make his free throws. But that's what a senior leader does, right? That's what they lose in Gillespie, right? Is that senior leadership. But I think they are in prime position to be successful. And they start their Big East tournament on Thursday. They're going to await Georgetown and Marquette, who they've beaten both teams twice. It'll be interesting because, look, they haven't played certain teams this year. They haven't played Xavier this year. They haven't played DePaul. But DePaul's not doing great this year. But Xavier is going to be a 12th seed, looks like, in the NCAA tournament. And UConn, for example, is a team that's on a really good hot streak right now. And a lot of people do not want to see them in the Big East tournament. Creighton's still a very talented, very good basketball team. And Villanova's still got a lot of talent. But again, they have to get it done. They have to prove it. Now, I still like their chances against Georgetown and Marquette and possibly Seton Hall after that. But yeah, I mean, UConn is going to be a team that I think has a good shot to win the Big East tournament. Do I think for Villanova it's vital they win the Big East tournament? No, because they're still going to probably get a 3 seed regardless. But I think that if they really want to build that confidence going to the NCAA tournament, I think they need to win this. And that's because I think without Gillespie, they need to build that confidence in their other stars and their role players. Because the NCAA tournament's no joke. It's at a bubble this year, and they played at Hinkle Fieldhouse at Butler and didn't do very well this year. And they got to build that chemistry now without Gillespie there to get it done. And look, Gillespie's going to do the best job he can off the court to be that leader for that team, but they got to build that on the court to be successful and to continue to win games. I think that's the key for them as they continue to move forward, is just to build chemistry, be positive in the moment, listen to what Jay Wright tells them, the other guys to not do too much who are playing more minutes, and players like Swider, Slater, Brian Antoine, Dixon, you made Group Daniels in there. When they get their open opportunities and they get their chances to shine, they got to take those opportunities. And that's what the great thing about college basketball is. That your coach builds a system that can be successful. And the role players have been working really hard to get to this moment, to play a lot of minutes. And now here's their opportunity. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how Villanova moves forward. I think, look, they're going to be I think, worse without him there. But I think that they definitely, if they all buy in, there's no reason why they can't be successful and do a good job. So that's kind of how I feel about Villanova going forward. Later on in my segment, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to mention my top 5 MVP candidates. And the reason I'm very excited about that segment is because my rankings are a little different outside of the top 2. 3 through 5, I think, will be a little different than how a lot of people are viewing it at this moment. And then I'm going to break down my next segment, the Lakers' key trade options, right? Where I think they are looking and who I think they should be looking at. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and on my next segment of the show, I will be breaking down those key trade options for the Lakers that can help them hopefully get back to being that NBA championship team and also provide some depth while Anthony Davis is recovering from his Achilles tendinosis. It will be really interesting to see how the Lakers progress forward. But yes, we're going to take a commercial break, and I will be back on to break down that segment shortly.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. On my previous segments, I talked about why it shouldn't be a surprise that Joel Embiid is an MVP candidate, and also the impact of Colin Gillespie from Villanova tearing his MCL and how that's going to affect Villanova moving forwards. Also, wait till the end of my show where I break down my top 5 MVP candidates. That'll be very interesting. As I stated a couple times earlier in this show, my 3 through 5 is definitely different than I think a lot of people's 3 through 5. So it's going to be fun to kind of tackle that as well. But this segment is going to talk about the Lakers and specifically the key acquisitions in the trade deadline that they need to make / who they're looking at in order to help build their championship team. Now, when I think of the Lakers, I think of a team last year that was incredibly successful with what they had, right? They had rim protectors, they had LeBron and Anthony Davis, they had guys who could hit timely shots in terms of their role players in KCP, Danny Green, Alex Caruso, Markieff Morris. But if we have to be frank, it was really LeBron and Anthony Davis stepping up and making the most out of their team. And they won the championship last year, and LeBron won Finals MVP, and Anthony Davis won his first NBA championship. So it was a pretty incredible run, and I think everyone kind of generally knows that was an incredible run, even if it was in the bubble or not. But the Lakers have had some turmoil this year, and they're still 24-12. They're still doing well, but they're 4th right now in the Western Conference. They have the same exact record as the Clippers, but they lost the Clippers opening night. And they lost to Phoenix in their last game with LeBron, at least, before the All-Star break. And then they lost to Sacramento without LeBron because of poor defense, and also Montrezl Harrell had a chance to win at the buzzer and missed a chippy layup that could have gotten them at least that win. But no one really expected him to win those games. And they had LeBron and Dennis Schroeder basically going against the Phoenix Suns' fully healthy squad. So if you look at all of that, it's not really a normal year, I guess, for the Los Angeles Lakers in terms of last year being everyone was healthy and everyone was doing well, but a shorter offseason. Anthony Davis has a Achilles tendinosis issue, and they need to be careful of that because Achilles injuries have been major problems for a couple NBA players, notably DeMarcus Cousins, Wesley Matthews, Kevin Durant, and most recently Klay Thompson. So with a star player like Anthony Davis, a guy the Lakers need to win a championship, they're going to be very careful about how they approach him. But the Lakers also have had a lot of struggles, in my opinion, from their front court. Now, Montrezl Harrell has been very good in terms of scoring off the bench, but his problem is defensively. His size has made it very difficult for him to guard athletic or very big, skilled centers. Yokish has dominated him previously, and Joel Embiid. And then DeAndre Jordan also dominated him when they played Brooklyn this year because of all the dribble penetration by James Harden and the lob up to DeAndre Jordan where he was just able to jump over Montrezl Harrell and lay it in there, dunk it. And then you have Marc Gasol, who's been, I think, the biggest disappointment for the Lakers. He came in out of shape, and he's not very mobile. He's old. He's just not the same player he once was. And I think the Lakers are looking desperately to try to find a front court defensive option. And they got Damian Jones, who used to play for the Golden State Warriors on those championship teams. And the Lakers are high on him because they think that he's a guy that can come in, rebound, block shots, run the floor. But the rest of the league really isn't high on him, and I'm personally not very high on him in terms of him being the answer to your front court problems. Can he be a good guy off the bench that can come in and block shots for you? Yeah, for sure. He definitely could be that for you. Come in for 10 minutes, get some rebounds, block some shots, sure. But I think Javale Mcgee and Dwight Howard were bigger losses for the Lakers than people actually think. Because those guys could run the floor. Those guys could block shots. Those guys were excellent in pick and roll in terms of rolling and making options open for LeBron to drive because they would seal off the center. Because a lot of centers like to do what I think is called as drop coverage, where the center goes back into the paint to absorb the roll guy and also the ball handler coming in. But what JaVale and Dwight did very well is they would seal that guy, allowing LeBron to come in and lay the ball in. Or they would get easy post touches. Or they just get lobs. Right? You see Dwight in Philly having success. JaVale's had some success in Cleveland. But JaVale's also on the trade block a little bit as well. But Damian Jones is not a guy I think is the answer to the Lakers' problems. I think he's an energy guy. I think he's definitely a decent player. But the Lakers need to find a starting big guy that I think can fulfill what Marc Gasol can't do. And Marc Gasol really just is not the same player he was for even 2 years ago. I like Marc Gasol. I mean, he's a great. When he was healthy, he was a great player. But he's not that player anymore. He's just not in shape. He's not as mobile as he once was, and not as good defensively. Offensively, he just really doesn't do a whole lot for you. You can't post him up. He's not a great three-point shooter this year, and all he really does is throw backdoor passes. So the Lakers definitely need to find a different option. And from reports, they're interested in Blake Griffin, but Blake Griffin looks like he's most likely going to sign with the Nets, according to reports. Andre Drummond, who that might be dicey. I'll explain those in a minute. Hassan Whiteside, and possibly even Javale Mcgee. Executives think that Hassan Whiteside and Javale Mcgee are the two best options in terms of their front court options. And then the Lakers also seem to have a lot of interest in PJ Tucker, which I think will be very interesting. But let's break down how these trades would work, if they actually can work, and who most likely would go to the Lakers, and I think make them a championship contender or not. So let's break all those down. So the first option the Lakers have considered is JaVale McGee. And JaVale McGee, in order for this to happen, the Cleveland Cavaliers would be having to trade him, or they'd have to buy out his contract, right? And what a buyout means, it basically occurs when a player and team decide to part ways, and they give up a portion of their contract to do that, and they're released. Basically, that forfeits a lot of the problems of a contract when you're trying to trade him, and it helps, at least value-wise, for a team that has a guy that they don't like, who has a very hard contract to trade with different teams. Blake Griffin was bought out for that very reason. So for JaVale McGee to be with the Lakers again, I think he would have to be bought out. And it just doesn't seem that realistic, because I don't think the Cavs are going to buy out JaVale McGee. I think they're going to want stuff in return for JaVale McGee. Draft picks, maybe potentially Kyle Kuzma. Right? They're not going to want Marc Gasol. That's the problem the Lakers that they fall into. No one really wants Marc Gasol, because they see the way he's playing this year, and they're saying, he's not really going to help us. JaVale McGee's athletic. He's still relatively young. He does things that a lot of guys can't do, which is he's just a good shot blocker, right? But the issue is with him is that, are they really, from the Cleveland Cavaliers side, going to give the Lakers back JaVale McGee based on a buyout and get nothing back for it? I don't see that happening. So I see that JaVale could possibly go to the Lakers if they trade away some of their assets, like Talen Horton-Tucker and maybe you say Kyle Kuzma. But if you look at this really from this angle, we look at this stuff and we say, okay, $4.2 million is JaVale's contract, right? So they would probably have to give up Talen Horton-Tucker, a draft pick, and probably some lower role player, maybe like a Wesley Matthews or something like that. So it is possible, right? It's definitely possible to do it. I just don't know if the Cavs are going to be willing to buy it. Like, financially, that could make a lot of sense, though, because I think that JaVale, at least, his contract works. But are the Lakers going to be willing to give up a lot of things? Like, again, right? Kuzma could be in that trade talk, even though it's $4.2 million. Cleveland might be asking for him. Cleveland might be asking for a lot of draft picks. Or if Cleveland just doesn't really believe in him and they just buy him out, then the Lakers got a great chance to get him. But we'll see. I think that would be a great piece again for them, because I think JaVale fit really well with the Lakers a year ago, and he did a lot of things for them on the defensive end that I think would be really valuable now. And he's a guy that you at least aren't scared if you switch. If you switch it onto a guard, you're not scared of that matchup, because the NBA is really big on switching nowadays. Now, Hassan Whiteside might be, I think, slightly more realistic than JaVale, because I think that JaVale at least has been providing some valuable pieces and minutes to what Cleveland's been giving them. He's averaging 8 points a game and a bunch of blocked shots, so he's been doing a decent job. But the issue with Hassan is Hassan has not played the last 4 games, and he averages 1.3 blocks a game, but his problem is, big thing with him is his motivation. And people think that he could potentially be bought out. And a buyout would fit the Lakers very well, because they wouldn't have to give up an entire slew of draft picks and Caruso or THT or one of these role players to get Hassan Whiteside. And Hassan Whiteside would fit with this team very well, because he's big, he guards people well defensively, he can score offensively if you need him to. And with the Blazers last year, he wasn't bad, like in terms of being able to disrupt shots and I mean, the Lakers eventually just got in foul trouble. But with LeBron, with leaders such as Anthony Davis and Caruso and KCP, right? LeBron would mold this guy to be able to fit that role they need him to fit. And I think he would be a better fit than Marc Gasol. I think any of the options I just named would be a better fit than Marc Gasol because Marc Gasol has been so disappointing. Now, the issue with Hassan Whiteside is he's not a good free throw shooter. And he has a very limited motor at times. Sometimes he plays incredibly well, gets you 20 and 15. In some games, he doesn't really want to come and play hard. So if the Lakers are going to be willing to get that, they're going to have to deal with that portion of him. With JaVale, you don't really get that. So the really two realistic options for them in the front court are JaVale or Hassan. I think Hassan is definitely more legitimate because he hasn't played the last couple games and the Kings look to potentially buy him out. And I think JaVale, I don't know how willing the Cavs are going to be and Colby Altman's going to be to pull that trigger right away. That's kind of where I go with that argument. The issue would be that, again, if they don't buy him out, there's the potential that they want a lot of draft picks in return, right? And the Lakers already have given they owe them a second-round pick in this year, and they could potentially the Kings would have to potentially wait to 2023 for a second-rounder for Whiteside. Would they be willing to do that? They're willing to trade him? I don't know. But I think that they potentially could buy him out, though. And I think that would make the things for the Lakers very easy. Now, Andre Drummond, he would be incredibly valuable if the Lakers were able to get him. But he has a salary of $20 million. So the Lakers would have to give up a lot to get him. A lot to get him. Draft picks, I would say probably Kuzma would have to be in that deal. Possibly THT or something like that, right? That's a big contract. And from what I heard, he seems more likely to go to a team like Brooklyn, but the Lakers can somehow pull off that deal. That'd be good. But the issue is they've already given up a lot of draft picks anyway for the Anthony Davis deal. So would you be willing to give up more draft picks and get rid of your youth to just want to win a championship? Now, the Lakers have proven that they're okay with that. And I think Andre Drummond would be the best fit out of any of the bigs I just mentioned because he's actually an 18 to 19-point game scorer. He averages 13 rebounds. He plays defense. He's a good passer. I mean, he's a good player. When he's in Cleveland, he was playing really well. But they wanted to go with Jared Allen, and that's kind of the reason they're looking to move him. But they would have to give up a lot to do it. Now, they're also looking at P.J. Tucker, who I think actually they will get. I think they're going to get P.J. Tucker because it makes the most sense. I think that they would have to give up a draft pick and just THT salary to get him. And I think they're definitely going to get either P.J. Tucker or I think they're going to get Hassan Whiteside to come to the Lakers. I don't think JaVale's going to go back there. I don't think Cleveland's going to do that. Because Cleveland's, I don't think, going to get a huge investment in return. But I think P.J. Tucker doesn't want to be in Houston. I think Houston wants to go into rebuilding mode. And I think the Lakers would be willing to give up stuff to get him. Because I think P.J. Tucker is a big-time 3-and-D guy. When he's played with star players, he shoots a very good percentage from 3. This has been his worst season so far, but also for Houston, this has been their worst season in a while. And I think they're going in a rebuilding mode. So I think that would make the most sense to acquire P.J. Tucker. Now, if the Lakers got Whiteside or P.J. Tucker, I think they would be in the prime position to win a championship. I think Whiteside would be a little more valuable in the sense that because he's a rim protector. But I do think that P.J. Tucker would be a really good. I just think that's financially. If you look at financial situations, the one that makes the most sense probably would be JaVale and P.J. Tucker. But I think the Kings are going to buy out Hassan Whiteside because I think they like Rashad Holmes. And I think that they don't really want to deal with Hassan Whiteside and the antics that he creates sometimes. And PJ Tucker, I don't think wants to be in Houston. I think he wants to be out of there. And I think the Lakers have at least pieces that they could give up. They give up draft picks, and they could also give up Taylor Horton Tucker for him. But I think that somehow I really think they're going to get Whiteside. I just don't, even though JaVale makes the most financial sense, I just don't see him going back to the Lakers. Because I just think that while he won a championship there, I just don't see Cleveland just giving the Lakers Javale Mcgee when he's been producing pretty well for them. I just don't see it. He's a good backup big guy for Jared Allen. I don't really see it, to be honest. But so I ideally think that I think they're going to get PJ Tucker, if anyone. PJ Tucker makes the most financial sense. I think he fits a need for them in 3 and D. He's a guy that you can at least put at the 4 if you need to be. If you want to go smaller and put Montrezl Harrell at the 5, it makes just a lot of sense. And he's a guy that at least can guard post defenders. He proved that last year. He's a good defender. Now, there's also crazy ones people consider about like D'Angelo Russell, but the Lakers have to give up like basically Schretter, Harrell, Kuzma, and a draft pick in order to do that. And Porzingis has also been around the trade block, but he would fit a great role with the Lakers, but his contract is ridiculous, and I don't think the Lakers would give up all that for a guy who's been injury prone throughout his career. So to conclude that, I think they're going to most likely get PJ Tucker, and then I would say go Hassan Whiteside, JaVale McGee, if anyone else. But because I think PJ Tucker makes the most sense. I think JaVale also makes a lot of financial sense, but I just don't know if Cleveland's going to be one to pull the trigger on that. And that's kind of how I feel on that one. We're going to take a short commercial break here, but when we come back, I'm going to unveil my top 5 MVP list. It'll be very interesting, and I think it's going to be different than I think how people view these 5 candidates for the MVP candidate normally. All that will be back up shortly.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter. And on my previous segment, I talked about who's most likely going to go to the Los Angeles Lakers in free agency. I said I think financially the ones that make the most sense are PJ Tucker and JaVale McGee. I think realistically it's going to be either PJ Tucker because I think LeBron likes a 3-and-D guy. And I also think Hassan Whiteside will be another option because I think the Kings will buy him out because he hasn't played recently. And I think JaVale McGee, I'm not sure the Cavs are going to be willing to give up on him right now because he is playing well as that backup big to Jared Allen for Cleveland right now. And Cleveland's been one of the hottest teams in the NBA. Now, this is a segment I am super excited about because I get to break down to everyone my top 5 MVP candidates this year in the NBA. It's a little different because I have the same 5 I think everyone has, but the way I rank them I think is a little different. Now my first 2 are obvious. It's Joel Embiid at number 1, LeBron James at number 2, but then I go Nicola Yokish at 3, I go James Harden at 4, and Damian Lillard at 5. Now people think the consensus top 3 in the MVP voting is Joel, LeBron, and Harden. But I'm going to break down why I think Jokic is a little bit more valuable to his team and has had a little bit better season than I think Harden has had in a minute. But let's talk about why I think Damian Lillard is the 5th in that ranking for me. And I think the problem is for Damian Lillard, really, is it comes down to he had very similar stats last year. And people, I think, will look at him and just underrate him a little bit. Damian Lillard's been having a phenomenal season. The fact that his team is 5th in the West right now, unbelievable. He's doing a great job. 29.8 points a game and 8 assists. Seriously, incredible job by him. He has had Yusuf Nurkic, Zach Collins, CJ McCollum in the lineup when he's been doing this. And look, he's making big shots and getting teammates involved, and he's winning. But his stats aren't quite as crazy as what Harden is doing, Yokish, LeBron, and Embiid. And also his team, besides the Nuggets, they're worse than every other team I just named on that list. Right? The reason why Jokic is higher than Dame is because Jokic's stats and impact is a little greater. And that's why ultimately I think while Damian Lillard's had an unbelievable year, that's where I kind of go below him. And that's not taking anything away from him. Damian Lillard is a top 10 player in the league and unreal. And he just knows how to win. But I think the problem with him ultimately comes down to he's had a spectacular season and he's impacted a lot of winning. Jokic has the team right now 6th in the West, and his stats have been quite better, and same thing with Harden. That's why I have Dame at 5, even though he's had a great season. And also defensively, he hasn't been that good, right? Portland's not a great defensive team. And ultimately, when you look at that at the end of the day, when he's went head-to-head with certain teams this year, like LeBron, they've lost. And that's kind of where I go with him. He's had a great year and spectacular season. I think arguably should have been an all-star starter. I think ultimately his defense, and I think the fact that other guys have had a little more impact on the offensive end slightly than him, will ultimately put him down at the 5th slot in the MVP rankings for me. So that's why I have Damian Lillard at number 5 on my list. But number 4 is going to seem a surprise to some people, and for me it's not, because when I look at the MVP race, I take the totality of a season into play. And I think this is why I personally ranked James Harden at 4 in the MVP rankings. Excuse me. He's playing unbelievable in Brooklyn. I'm looking, and look, he's doing really good job, right? He has a shooting of 40% from 3, 86% from the line, 48% from the floor, 11 assists, 8 rebounds, 25.3 points a game. And he's averaging 25.5 with Brooklyn. But are people going to forget the fact in Houston of how poor he was playing? Are people just going to forget that? Forget how his team did it in his 8 games in Houston? Because I certainly didn't. When he was there in Houston, they were awful. They were awful. They were terrible. And what I don't really understand is how people just gloss over that. He comes in out of shape. He comes in violating COVID protocol, doesn't show up to training camp with a new coach and a new players coming in John Wall, Christian Wood, and DeMarcus Cousins. And look, you can say the stuff about him going off in the media and saying the team is terrible when that looked a little hypocritical, and that's people can look at it that way. I'm looking strictly on the court with this. I'm looking at the fact that he was out of shape, not as good going to the basket. Didn't offensively, his numbers were the worst in Houston they had been in his time there. And the team was doing awful. They got literally manhandled by the Lakers, and the Lakers were making fun of him. LeBron, everyone remembers this, when he shot the 3, turned around to his bench like Steph Curry, because they were blowing them out so much. I mean, Harden was getting a shot blocked left and right. He just looked slow. And demanding trades. I mean, that whole situation was just bad. And I take that because the way the off the court stuff is not any way have any shape or form of playing into the MVP race. It's on the court. And when he plays on the court, if you look at it, he's been great in Brooklyn, but not great in Houston. And I have to take those 8 games into consideration. He's not first in PER in the NBA. He's just not. He's at 24.4, which is not a top 3 in the league kind of situation like he has been in previous years. Because even though he's doing great, he has KD and Kyrie there also. And he's been playing unbelievable. Look, his assist numbers are unreal. And his time in Brooklyn, I got to give it to him. This is probably one of the best stint, or maybe the best stint of his career in terms of like just the impact he's having in winning. Right? I think Brooklyn's a real championship contender. But he gets a knock on for what he did in Houston. And I hate to be honest there. It's just, he's, the team's 17-6 in Brooklyn with him there. And he's putting up great numbers once again. And him and D'Antoni are back together. And Steve Nash is doing a good job of having him use the pick and roll effectively and everything like that. Houston, he was awful. He had a great game to start the year at Portland, where he had 44 points, and everyone's like, "Oh, he had a good year." And he said, "No, he didn't. His stats were terrible in Houston. They were awful." And if you look at his statistics right now, and look, he averaged 24.8 points a game there, but he shot 34% from below 35% from three, and 44% from the floor. And he had a lot of turnovers at 4.3 a game. And look, I understand he had 10.4 assists, but again, he was shooting one of the worst percentages of his career from three, and he was not scoring a lot of points. And also the aggression. Like, he had multiple games where he had like 15 to 18 points and before he left Houston. And that does value to the MVP because it's the totality of your season. It's not, we don't view you on like 25 games if you move to some team and say, "Oh yeah, you're the MVP now." You got to take the totality of the season. And Harden's a great player. Don't get me wrong. He's done a lot for Houston, and I was really happy to see the way he handled Houston and everything like that, and how it just went over smoothly and not any bad blood. But when I look at MVP, I can't put him ahead of guys who've been consistent all year, and when he had that time in Houston. But he's ahead of Damian Lillard because his team in Brooklyn has a better record when he's been there, and he's impacted winning, I think, more. The team right now is second in the East, and that's all because of him primarily. They were below 500 when he was there, before he wasn't there. And that proves to me a little bit more about kind of the impact he's made. That's why he's still top 4 MVP candidate. But the Houston thing does dent him a little bit in that top 3 MVP race for me. So that's why I rank him at number 4 on my list. Number 3 is Nicola Yokish from the Denver Nuggets. Denver right now is the 6th seed in the West. So right now they play the Los Angeles Clippers. They play the playoffs tomorrow. He's an all-star starter. He's top 10 in every offensive category. That's why I think he's a top 3 MVP candidate, because he's impacting that offense so much. He's number 1 in player efficiency rating, which means he has the best offensive impact in the NBA this season. And he's a center, and he's top 5 in assists. He's top 8 in scoring. He's top 10 in rebounding. And he's had signature games. He's had 47 against the Jazz. He had 50 at Sacramento. He had 43 versus Boston. He had recently 37, 10, and 11 against the Bucks. He has the best field goal percentage of his career. He's averaging 1.6 steals. Again, I think he's playing much better defense too. And his team has been winning games because of his impact. And when you look at an MVP, he's been doing this kind of stuff all year. People are glamoring of whatever Joel Embiid did against Rudy Gobert, but Nicola gave him 47 points early in the season. And that's kind of, look, he's not better than Joel Embiid this year, but his offensive impact has been arguably one of the highest in the league, or top 2 highest in the league. Right? According to the statistics, he has the best offensive efficiency, and that plays a huge role in the MVP case, because without him, this team would not be a playoff team. Brooklyn would still be a playoff team without Harden on that team. They would easily be still a championship favorite. They wouldn't need Harden. It's just that Harden's numbers are so ridiculous. That's why he's still top 4. But Jokic, without Jokic there, Jamal Murray and Will Barton wouldn't lead that team to the playoffs. No way. And that's why I have Jokic at 3, because the impact he's made Just can't be denied. I mean, and again, they've won a bunch of games recently, and he's just destroying centers in the opposite end. He had 39 against Chicago recently, and they beat Indiana the other night, and he had 20 and 12 in that game, and he's impacting winning. He's been consistently there. He's been there at every game, and he's produced at a high level. His only real bad game was at the Lakers this year, and that's why I think LeBron's ahead of him, because LeBron has outdueled him most times they played him. But I think LeBron James will be, and Joel Embiid are higher. But I think that what Nicola Yokish has done puts him in a top 3 MVP candidate. I just don't think that's disputable. His offensive impact is ridiculous. Denver's a top 5 offense because of him. I guess top 6. But still, without him on that team, compared to James Harden, right? James Harden, I think, is more valuable than Damian Lillard's been this year, because I think he's had a better overall impactful offensive year. But without Jokic on Denver, is Denver a playoff team? No. They're not. And that's where I end up going with that kind of argument right there. Now let's go to my number 2 MVP guy, and that's LeBron James. Even though people still think he's going to win the MVP, he isn't right now, in my opinion, the MVP frontrunner. I think the last couple games have hurt him in that ability to be that frontrunner. But his stats this year are simply amazing. He's 36 years old. He's in his 18th season in the league. He's averaging a little under 26 points a game, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists. He has a team top 4 in the Western Conference. I think the biggest thing, though, for him is defensively, he's been arguably the best defender in the league this year, if you think about it. There's a thing called defensive win shares, which mean basically how many wins are basically attributed to an individual's defensive play. And LeBron James is first in that category. He's first in overall win shares. And the reason why that's important is because that means his defensive impact has also been huge. The Lakers have the number 1 defensive team in the NBA right now. And he's shooting the 3-ball pretty decently this year at 36%. He's shooting a high percentage at 50%. He's still performing at that LeBron James level. I mean, his most recent game, they lost to Phoenix. He had 38 points. I mean, the guy is still unbelievable. And he has more skill. That fadeaway in the mid-post has gotten really consistent. I think the fact that he's also playing off the ball has helped him become a dominant scorer at times. And if you look at it also, the fact that he is the Finals MVP and he hasn't slowed down all that much, you got to put him in the MVP race because he should have won it last year, in my opinion. And Giannis was great last year, but I think LeBron's impact, as everyone saw, he's the best player in the NBA, right? But that's not really what the MVP is, right? You can be the best player in the NBA, but the MVP is who has the best statistical season and whose team has the best record. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day, which a lot of people think that is why the MVP award needs to be changed to serve as qualifications and when it's presented. But LeBron James has played unbelievable this year, and he's only missed 1 game, and that was kind of like the Lakers saying, hey, you need to take this 1 game off against the Kings because you played every single game and played a high amount of minutes. Again, he's helped this team win double overtime games against like OKC and the Pistons, and they've beaten teams like Denver this year and Dallas, Golden State. Recently, they blew them out. They blew out Portland recently. And LeBron James has that impact. I mean, this is just what he is. He is the best player in the NBA. I just don't think right now he's quite the MVP. But it's close. Again, his numbers are phenomenal. I think defensively, that's the big thing for him. If he can continue to be number 1 in defensive win shares and have that impact, and the Lakers have the number 1 defense in the NBA, and climb up the rankings, get to the 2 seed or in the rankings and in the standings of the Western Conference, I think that he will have a great chance to win MVP. But right now, due to the fact that they're 4th in the West, I got to give the MVP frontrunner to Joelle Embiid. I almost said Joelle MVP. Because Joelle is the MVP this year so far. And 30 points, career high. 11.6 rebounds. That's tied for a career high. He's shooting a career high from the floor, 52.1%, and a little under 42% from three. His team has the best record in the Eastern Conference, and they're 2-4 without him in the lineup. He's missed 6 games, which is, for him, that's phenomenal. It means he's actually really dependable, and he's been able to be in the lineup a lot because he's in the best shape of his career, and he's the most motivated I think he is in his career. And as I stated in the earlier segment, it's pretty obvious why he's the MVP. Because he's second in player efficiency rating. He's defensively one of the better defensive players in the league. I think in terms of win shares, he's top 5. And you put that together with a lot of winning, and the fact that the team's been terrible without him, he is the MVP of the league right now. It's close, but I think that Joel Embiid is the MVP. He has a career high this year in steals. And he's had big games, right? But they also beaten the Jazz, the Nets, the Lakers, right? He beat LeBron James, which that gives him an MVP edge. He beat James Harden when James Harden was just the one guy on the team. It was Joel. They beat them pretty handily. He beat the Jazz the other night where he dominated Rudy Gobert. He had 50 points in the game against Chicago this year. He's dominated the Boston Celtics, who've given him a lot of trouble in recent years. And this is kind of who he is this year. He's just been the most dominant player in the NBA so far this year. And I think statistically and where his team's record is, that's why he's going to, right now, have the MVP edge. And whether that's fair or not, well, you can judge your MVP award. I still think LeBron James is the best player in the league, for example. I don't think Joel Embiid is the best player in the NBA because I have to see that in the playoffs. But regular season, you have to take statistics, impact, and winning, right? Offensive, defensive impact. Joel Embiid is tops in those. Statistics, he's tops in those. And winning. His team has the best record in the Eastern Conference, ahead of the Nets, who they just beat when James Harden was there. So you can't give James Harden the edge over Joel Embiid because Joel Embiid beat him head-to-head. Can't give LeBron James the edge because even though LeBron James had 34 in that game at Philly, they didn't beat him. And Philly is 2-4 without Embiid. The Lakers are around 500 with just LeBron James there. And with Dennis Schroeder. With just with LeBron James there, they're 0-4. They haven't won a game when LeBron James has just been him. Or my apologies. They're 2-4 because they actually did win 2 games earlier. But they had a 4-game losing streak when LeBron James was just the guy there. And that's because, look, the Lakers role players are not the most talented players. They fit certain roles, and they have Anthony Davis and LeBron built to really win the games for them. And Dennis Schroeder is a very good player as well. But Joel has had incredible games this year. I think statistically, his impact has been the greatest, I think, this year so far during the regular season, even though I think LeBron James is the best player, like I said. And you take Joel off of that 76ers team, I think they're fighting for a playoff spot. And I don't think they would be a NBA Finals contender like they are now. I have them a lock going to Eastern Conference Finals, and I think they would push or beat the Nets in a 7-game series. I do. If he plays like he is now, I definitely think there's no answer for him in the playoffs. And Tobias Harris is really good, and Ben Simmons is playing better, but there's no answer for Joel Embiid because he can shoot mid-range jump shots at an incredibly high clip. He's a good three-point shooter. He's a good foul shooter and gets fouled more than anyone else in the NBA. And he's statistically better in almost every category, except for probably block shots, than his entire other seasons previous to this. Points are higher. Rebounds are around the same. Assists are higher. Steals are higher. The player efficiency rating is higher. Defensive win shares are really high. And that's why he's the MVP. Because it's your impact you've had on your team in terms of winning and being valuable in the regular season. And their team has been 2-4 without him. So clearly they need him to win. They lost to Utah by like 15 points when he wasn't there. They beat them the other night when he was. If that doesn't scream impact to you, I don't know what else will. Now this concludes my show. Again, as I will state now, my top 5 MVP candidates. Joel Embiid, number 1. LeBron James, 2. Nicola Yokish, 3. James Harden, 4. Damian Lillard 5. I hope you guys enjoyed this content. I encourage you guys to follow us on social media, on Facebook or Twitter, GSMC Basketball Podcast. And check us out also on the different podcast platforms. You can check out our website. You can check out us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any platform you listen to podcasts on. Give it a listen for sure. Give us a good review. Follow us. We really would appreciate that.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.